In this lesson, we will talk about quality control. Now, quality control is really important, as of everything that I've mentioned until now, but really, it is really important. And most brands, when they're first starting out, they don't realize how important it is to set it in place from the beginning. And growing brands, if you don't get into the habit to have this process built into your production from the beginning, you continue going this way until a major mistake and drama happens later down the line, and then you realize how important it is and how you should have had it set from the beginning. So my advice to you would be, from the very beginning, whenever you are creating your sample and thinking of moving on to production, just take a little bit of time and create that quality control document, checklist, but also outline what is the process, how you would like your goods to be inspected before they come back to you. Because once they arrive to you with mistakes, it's very costly to send them back to be fixed. Some factories ask that you pay one way, they pay another way, which seems really unfair, really, if you think about it, that you should pay to send goods that weren't correctly made in the first place. But at that point, you are in their hands, and they say to you, do you want it fixed or not fixed? So you end up paying. So creating this process at the beginning, before you start production, or even at the beginning of your production, incorporating it as part of your production is really important. So what does quality control mean? Basically, it means that you need to outline what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for your goods. You can create a chart for every product, outlining what are all the important components, what your product should not be missing, and what are small faults, even if you don't communicate that to the factory, but be clear to yourself, what are little things that may happen that only you would know that they happened, they're not the way you wanted them, but they would not stop a client from buying the product. Now, this is called commercial thinking and commercial decision making. And sooner or later, you would have to, on numerous occasions, have to employ this commercial thinking. And it's really important to be able to stand back and say, to realize that you as the product owner, as the designer, you would know this product intimately. You would be able to immediately spot, even if it's 1 millimeter away from somewhere to the left or to the right. But the customer might not be. So as long as whatever is not as perfect as you want it to be, is not stopping a customer from flagging it up and thinking, it's not really paying that much money because this is not the way perfect, then you should let it go. There's bigger fights, there's bigger battles to battle. So quality control is basically creating that process, defining what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and who is going to be responsible for checking it. Now, most factories, and especially good factories, have a department dedicated to quality control. And when the production goes through the various processes, good factories will have inline quality control. They will be checking during cutting, let's say, when the cutter is cutting the fabric or the leather, whatever, they will be checking for marks, etc., and avoiding them. So that's first quality control. Then, as they're stitching the material, if someone notices something that's been missed during cutting, they can flag it up and they can eliminate that product. So as your order is progressing through the people who make it, they would be ideally checking on things and flagging up if something is not perfect. It doesn't always happen, but good factories have this kind of mentality. And even when it's finished and even when it's perfect, it then goes to a quality control who is doing the final check. Ideally, they would have a list of your criteria, and they would be able to check via the criteria if the product matches your criteria. Ideally, they would also have a sealed sample that they can look at, and if they have a question, is this right, is that wrong, they can check it with the sealed sample. And only then they would pack and ship the product to you. Now, while this is really good, it's also important for you to be responsible and to have part of this. So your part is basically providing them with a checklist, with the documentation for them to be able to do a good job. A second thing that I would recommend you do is that if you can go and check it yourself, I would advise you to do that, especially at the beginning when you're working with a new factory, because it takes a few seasons for the factory to get to know you and you to get to know them, and for both parties to understand what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, how you work, etc. In the past, I have had factories that after working with them for a long time, they would say, oh, rejected XYZ because it wouldn't meet your criteria. And on going to the factory, I was pleasantly surprised to see that actually some of the things that they had rejected were things that actually only I would know that they weren't quite right. Me and the factory to a customer, that would be okay. So I would then, depending on what the fault is, either accept them and explain to them why so that they know in the future, or I might accept them with a small discount because it's not a big thing. So, but that is what happens when you work with a good factory, and then when you build on that relationship. But until you reach that situation, it is really important that you actually go to the factory and you check your production. If there is a distance involved, or for whatever reason you can't go and do that, sometimes it's good to say to the factory, can you send me a few products, like 10%, perhaps randomly selected products, send them to me in advance, let me check, if they're okay, and then okay for the rest of the production to be shipped. Now, what happens is that if you spot something little, or let's say you spot that perhaps the product wasn't tidied up very well, there's a few loose threads, or there's a little bit of glue in a leather bag pockets, which things that regularly happen, you might then flag it up and say, hey, can you go back over the production, and I've noticed in the pieces that you sent me that there was some glue in the pockets, or there was some loose threads, or can you redo this, or can you improve on that, or I've spotted in one or two products such and such. Can you go through the production and just make sure that the other products don't have that fault, or you fix it? So at that level, even, it allows you to check with your own eyes the product, because after all, you know how you want that product to be the best. And anything that you might spot to send to the factory. In the absence of this, you would have to rely on the factory, and especially if you haven't provided them with any quality control checklists. Like I said before, once you get your production and it's not right, then it's really too late. And I just to give you an examples of things that can go wrong. For instance, I was some time back, I accepted to do for a client a very fast job. And I spoke to the factory, and they said, no problem, we'll do everything to turn it around really quickly. And when it came to quality control time, because there was no time for me to jump on a plane and go and inspect the production, I decided to do something I had never done before. I decided to do a Skype quality control. So we would literally be on Skype, and the factory manager would show me the product, and I would say, turn it this way, show me that, show me this. And that was my quality control, and everything was perfect. But the only thing that I did not check, because I just didn't think that I need to check it, was the labels, the branded label inside the product. And when I received the production, they had forgotten to do it. And because it was such a rush job, I didn't have time to create, the checklist that I'm talking to you about. And had there been a checklist, and had I made them to go and tick through it, that would so easily have been avoided. So instead, I had a bigger problem to solve. Another example to give you is some time back, I'm giving a talk to a group of startups, and one girl came to me, and she had a problem. She had worked with a factory who made a sample. The sample wasn't perfect, but she decided to make some amendments to it. She didn't send a sample to copy, gave them the order, went proceeded. I think she was doing some kind of scarf product. It was a Muslim girl. I think it was like a scarf for runners. And when she got her production, they had stitched it all over. There was literally no gap for the face. And because there was no checklist again, there was no pictures, nothing. It was just an email, okay, go ahead and make whatever amount, 100 units, 200, etc. They had just follow the pattern and see that they had to stitch everywhere, and they just stitched it. So really silly, really, but so easily avoided if there was a process, if there was a checklist, if there was a drawing, if someone had thought through what is the acceptance criteria when the product is finished. So having a quality control process and system in place from the beginning, no matter how little you are or how big, is really important. And starting with something small is better than having nothing. And building on this, and creating. Once you create a template, and your product is not going from season to season change so much. So if you have a standard template of what you need to have in a product to make it acceptable. And then from product to product and variations you build on that, that will be so much easier. So the first time you do something, it would be the hardest, then it just gets easier. So my advice to you is don't skip that step. It's really important, because if you skip it, sooner or later, it would really come back and bite you, and it would be you that will be spending more money to fix it or losing your production, etc. So have it.